The story opens in a dark whisper, the kind of hush that doesn't ask for permission but demands attention. Imagine for a moment, tomorrow your name explodes across every feed, every headline, every platform. Not for heroics, not for brilliance, but for deeds so twisted people argue whether you were genius or monster. That's the stage Ivan IV, later called Ivan the Terrible, steps onto in 16th century Russia. His legend isn't about hashtags, but about fear so deep that 5 centuries later, people still lean closer to hear what he did. Think you could stomach medieval justice? Spoiler, most modern people would faint before the real show even starts. So, before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time of day is it right now? As the room softens around you, lean back and allow this story to unfold, an experience unlike anything you've listened to until now. Because behind the throne of Russia's first crowned Tsar, there's a darker truth waiting. The boy who becomes Ivan the Terrible enters life in 1530 inside Kremlin walls that echo with both chants and conspiracies. He's born a prince of the Muscovy, but the cradle doesn't shield him from power games. At just 3, his father dies, leaving him officially the Grand Prince. Sounds impressive, but in practice, it's a toddler as ruler, which means the boy becomes a pawn. Noble families fight for influence like hyenas circling a cub. He watches as rival boyars poison each other at feasts, arrange accidental hunting mishaps, and even raid palace chambers for loot. For a child, bedtime stories involve betrayal and sudden death. The formative memory many historians point to is stark. Ivan sees nobles beat his beloved dog to death before his eyes. Not exactly the kind of therapy-approved childhood moment. Scholars still debate whether this anecdote is literal truth or metaphor for the cruelty he witnessed daily. Either way, it fits. He grows up marinating in humiliation and helplessness, and it burns into his psyche. He responds by retreating into books and scripture, memorizing long passages, and convincing himself he's chosen by God to rule absolutely. Imagine a teenager who not only believes the Bible gives him divine authority, but also has armed guards at his disposal. By his teens, he's lashing out, throwing animals from towers, organizing violent games, and punishing servants with merciless precision. Even for his era, it stands out. The coronation of 1547 formalizes it. Ivan declares himself Czar of all Rus, the first ruler to wear the imperial crown instead of merely calling himself a prince. He insists on the title linking him to the Caesars of Rome. He's not playing local politics anymore. He's declaring cosmic destiny. At 27, he's not content to rule. He wants to dominate souls. And then comes the first grand performance of terror. In Moscow, a devastating fire rips through the city, killing thousands. Citizens blame the Tsar's insiders. Instead of easing their pain, Ivan seizes the stage. He orders arrests, torture, and public executions. Nobles and commoners alike are paraded, accused of treason or arson, then forced to confess under torment. Witnesses record the spectacle, broken bodies dragged through the square, while Ivan watches with almost theatrical calm. Was it justice, theater, or paranoia? Historians still argue whether his early purges were defensive strikes against real plots or his way of announcing, "I alone hold life and death." There's even a quirky footnote. During one of these early Reign of Terror phases, Ivan orders exotic animals imported to amuse himself. Bears, leopards, even camels. The same Tsar who could order a man flayed alive also enjoyed parading his bear around to frighten courtiers. Imagine working at court where your Monday meeting could involve either a dancing bear or a death sentence. No wonder people walked on eggshells. His cruelty wasn't random, though. Each torment, each execution served a message. The boy who grew up powerless now shaped every whisper of fear into fuel for his rule. The crown glittered, but it rested on a man convinced the only way to survive was to crush before being crushed. And still, the true horrors were only warming up. Ivan hadn't yet devised his masterpiece of intimidation, the stage where punishment became ritual and torture became the daily news. The boy, scarred by fear, was about to make fear the lifeblood of a nation. The throne isn't just a seat for Ivan, it's a stage, and he treats his realm like an audience trapped in their seats. He doesn't simply punish, he orchestrates punishment into theater. Executions under his reign are not whispered affairs behind walls, but spectacles designed to sear themselves into memory. To walk through Moscow in Ivan's time is to risk stumbling into a horror pageant where pain doubles as performance. Take the example of his staged public tortures in Red Square. Ivan assembles crowds as if for a festival, only the entertainment is a noble writhing under fire or a traitor bound to a wheel, while the Tsar delivers commentary like a master of ceremonies. In one infamous scene, he reportedly forces boyars to watch their own comrades dismembered while musicians play to cover the screams. That's not justice, it's branding. The message is simple. Cross Ivan, and your agony becomes the city's showpiece. The mainstream fact here is chilling enough. Ivan professionalizes cruelty. He integrates ritualized torture into governance, making it a mechanism of state authority. But there's also the stranger detail. He occasionally forces clergy to attend these performances, blurring sacred ritual with terror. Imagine a Sunday service where your priest, barely holding the cross steady, is ordered to bless an execution as though it were communion. That's not faith. It's stagecraft designed to remind everyone that God himself, supposedly, sides with the Tsar's whip. And Ivan doesn't restrict his cruelty to enemies. Sometimes his theater is punishment for courtiers who bore him. Historians record a bizarre punishment where a noble is dressed as a foreign enemy, then defeated in a mock battle, beaten nearly to death while Ivan and his circle laugh. It's cruelty with improvisation, like a play where the script always ends in one man's suffering. The psychology behind this? Scholars still argue whether Ivan staged these events as propaganda, consciously using fear as statecraft, or whether he was simply indulging a sadistic impulse cloaked in ceremony. Whichever it is, it worked. The people learned to cheer and cry on cue, desperate to survive the Tsar's shifting moods. There's also the unforgettable fire of Moscow in 1570, when thousands are executed under accusations of treason and arson. Instead of rebuilding hope, Ivan rebuilds fear. He marches supposed traitors into public squares, orders confessions extracted under unimaginable torment, and ensures each confession ends with a bloody finale. Citizens gather, not because they want to, but because failing to attend might be seen as disloyalty. It's the medieval version of compulsory viewing, long before streaming services made binge-watching voluntary. To modern ears, the idea of attending an execution sounds medieval because, well, it is. But in Ivan's Russia, it's Tuesday, and he ensures no one forgets who directs the show. The fringe anecdote that lingers in whispers. Ivan keeps lists, detailed records of who attends his events, who flinches, who fails to clap. It's surveillance in a primitive form. Some historians doubt the accuracy of these records, suggesting later chroniclers embroidered the tale to highlight his paranoia. But even the possibility feels fitting. After all, Ivan is a ruler who doesn't just want obedience, he wants proof of obedience, ideally written in the expressions of a trembling crowd. One of the cruelest ironies. Ivan occasionally offers mercy, but only as part of the performance. He might spare one condemned man at the last moment, creating a twisted sense of gratitude in the lucky survivor and dread in everyone else. Mercy isn't mercy when it's theater, it's another instrument of control. Imagine thanking the man who just had your friend boiled alive because he let you walk home. That warped psychology becomes part of the machinery of his reign. And yet, behind the grotesque shows lies insecurity. He grew up humiliated by nobles. Now he parades their suffering as payback. He grew up fearful. Now he exports fear like a national product. The boy who learned that survival depended on cruelty now ensures no one in his empire forgets who holds the lash. Still, these theater punishments are only the opening act. Ivan hasn't yet unleashed his private troupe of executioners, the infamous Oprichnina. That shadow army will drag his staged performances off the square and into the alleyways, the monasteries, the very homes of his subjects. What begins as theater will soon spill into everyday life, where torture stops being performance and becomes reality lurking outside every door. The theater of cruelty eventually tires Ivan. Too many eyes, too much applause required. He wants something more intimate, something he can unleash without the logistics of filling Red Square every week. So he invents his own private shadow state, the Oprichnina. This isn't a cabinet or an army in the traditional sense. It's a brotherhood of fanatics dressed in black, mounted on black horses with dog heads and brooms attached to their saddles. The symbols matter. The dog's head represents biting the enemies of the Tsar. The broom represents sweeping them away. Imagine a biker gang mixed with monks, and then add state authority. That's the Oprichnina, a force terrifying not only for what they do, but for what they symbolize. Mainstream history fact: Ivan formally establishes the Oprichnina in 1565, dividing Russia into two realms. The Oprichnina, his personal territory policed by his private army, and the Zemshchina, governed more traditionally. This partition isn't about efficient governance, it's about control. Ivan now holds the power to decide who lives in fear of black cloaked riders knocking at their door at night. The methods of the Oprichniki, as members are called, make Ivan's earlier public tortures look almost quaint. They ride through town, seizing nobles accused of treason, dragging them into dungeons, and inflicting punishments so grotesque, the rumors alone are enough to paralyze communities. Victims are beaten, drowned, or suffocated, sometimes under bizarre rituals. One story describes nobles sewn into bearskins and hunted with dogs for sport. Is it literal truth or exaggerated gossip? Historians still argue whether Ivan's men were quite that theatrical, but the fact such stories circulate tells you all you need to know. People believed him capable of it. The Oprichnina becomes both sword and theater troupe. Unlike Ivan's staged executions, their work is often in the shadows, whispered about by survivors, or simply guessed at when whole families disappear overnight. Yet Ivan still demands spectacle. When the Oprichniki descend on Novgorod in 1570, the investigation of alleged treason becomes a massacre. For 5 weeks, the city turns into an outdoor torture chamber. Citizens are drowned in the river, monasteries are raided, monks are whipped until they collapse. One eyewitness describes women and children dragged through snow, bound in chains. The cruelty shocks even hardened Russians. Quirky detail: the Oprichniki have a monastery-like rule of life. They pray, dine communally, and live under vows of brotherhood. It's a warped parody of monastic devotion, except instead of silence and humility, their daily work is violence and terror. Imagine monks who trade candles for cudgels, psalms for shrieks. That blend of religiosity and sadism only deepens the sense that Ivan sees himself as God's executioner, empowered to erase anyone he considers suspect. The Tsar himself joins in. He doesn't sit back in a palace while others torture. Reports say he personally interrogates, beats, and kills. Sometimes he disguises himself to spy on his own people, then punishes them for imagined disloyalty. Scholars still debate whether his paranoia was rooted in genuine threats or his own unraveling mind. One thing is certain: by the time the Oprichnina is in full swing, no one, noble, merchant, peasant, even priest, is safe. The psychological toll is immense. A society already accustomed to brutality now adapts to constant suspicion. Neighbors denounce neighbors, servants betray masters. Loyalty to the Tsar becomes less about devotion and more about surviving another day. If you whispered a complaint, you risked being hauled away by men in black. If you smiled too broadly at the wrong time, it might be seen as mockery. It's the 16th century version of living under a surveillance state. Except instead of cameras, there are horsemen carrying dog heads. And here's where Ivan twists the knife. He presents the Oprichnina not as tyranny, but as purification. Russia, he insists, is plagued by treasonous rot, and he is God's scalpel cutting it away. To be tortured or executed isn't framed as cruelty, but as divine necessity. A twisted kind of logic where suffering is cleansing. That theological angle ensures resistance isn't just treason, it's heresy. Yet for all their terror, the Oprichniki eventually overreach. Their violence destabilizes the realm instead of securing it. The massacre at Novgorod devastates trade, cripples trust, and spreads famine. Even Ivan, perhaps realizing he's poisoned his own well, disbands the Oprichnina in 1572. But by then, the damage is irreversible. Russia's body politic is scarred, and Ivan's legend as a ruler of horrors is cemented. The cliffhanger: the Oprichnina's collapse doesn't mean Ivan softens. On the contrary, stripped of his black-clad brotherhood, he retreats deeper into religion and paranoia, mixing divine visions with fire and punishment so surreal they terrify even the clergy meant to guide him. If torture as theater and torture as shadow warfare were shocking, wait until faith itself becomes the spark for his cruelty. Even without the Oprichnina doesn't mellow, he mutates. He clutches religion with both hands, not for comfort, but as tinder for paranoia. Churches and monasteries that once offered sanctuary now become stages for his spirals. He walks into cathedrals barefoot, weeping, and then orders priests flogged hours later for supposed disloyalty. One day he kneels before icons like a penitent monk. The next, he turns the altar into a courtroom for condemned nobles. The blend of faith and fury is dizzying, like watching a man use scripture as both lullaby and whip. The mainstream historical fact is grimly clear. Ivan's reign coincides with Russia's rise as a centralized autocracy, and religion plays a role in legitimizing his absolute power. By cloaking cruelty in divine rhetoric, he convinces many that to resist him is to resist God. The Tsar becomes less a man and more a terrifying fusion of monarch and prophet. Yet the quirks are unforgettable. Ivan reportedly composes his own sermons, lecturing clergy with long, rambling tirades about loyalty and divine punishment. Picture a czar, dripping in jewels, scolding bishops for not praying hard enough while armed guards linger in the wings. Some chronicles even describe him forcing church choirs to sing while executions unfold outside. It's theater again, but this time with hymns instead of drums. Historians still argue whether Ivan truly believed he was God's chosen avenger or whether he cynically used faith to excuse his paranoia. The debate lingers because the records blur performance and sincerity. Was he deluded or calculating? Perhaps both. Madness and method often dance together in his reign. One infamous case cements this era of fire and faith. The 1570 massacre of Novgorod, already mentioned, isn't just political, it's spiritual theater. Ivan accuses the city of plotting to defect to Lithuania, branding it not only treason, but apostasy. His punishment is framed as holy cleansing. Thousands are dragged to the Volkhov River, bound and drowned under the sign of the cross. Clergy are beaten in their own churches, icons smashed, relics stolen. Ivan reportedly prays over the corpses, thanking God for the purge. A massacre turned into liturgy. Then there's fire, the literal kind. During his spirals, Ivan delights in burning towns suspected of disloyalty. He orders torchings of homes, granaries, entire districts, then blames the flames on divine wrath. Survivors stumble out of ashes convinced they are witnessing the apocalypse. Imagine living in a village where the Tsar's visit means your house might be tomorrow's bonfire of faith. The paranoia extends to his own family. He suspects his closest relatives of plotting against him. He imprisons cousins, executes in-laws, and berates wives for imagined treasons. The most infamous act? The killing of his own son, Ivan Ivanovich, in 1581. Accounts describe a furious argument with the young heir, ending with Ivan striking him with a staff so hard he collapses. Scholars debate the exact details. Was it deliberate rage, a tragic accident, or a mix? Either way, the sight of the Tsar cradling his dying son becomes one of history's most haunting images of power turned inward. Quirky tidbit: despite his fury, Ivan is obsessed with monastic rituals. He even drafts his own monastic rule for himself, imagining a future where he lives as a humble monk. Never mind that humility isn't exactly his brand. The irony is sharp. A man who orders mass executions also fantasizes about retreating into a monastery. It's like imagining a mafia boss announcing he'll one day run a flower shop. Ivan's relationship with clergy grows more toxic. He relies on them for legitimacy, but despises their limits. When Metropolitan Philip dares criticize the Oprichnina, Ivan has him deposed and suffocated by Oprichniki. That's the pattern. Loyalty is rewarded with survival, dissent with suffocation. The church bends because what's the alternative? Faith becomes not a break on power, but a mask for it. This fusion of paranoia, religion, and fire culminates in a reign where the sacred and the sadistic blur. Citizens hear bells toll for mass, then screams echo from the square. They watch their Tsar pray on his knees, then order an entire family executed minutes later. That whiplash is Ivan's essence, divine mercy and earthly terror colliding. But there's still one more act left, and it's the darkest. Ivan grows older, more frail, but not gentler. His last years spiral into a morbid obsession with death, sin, and legacy. The man who once burned villages now spends nights pondering whether his soul itself is already damned. The tortures do not end. They turn inward into psychological torment that consumes him and those still trapped around him. By the time Ivan staggers into the final years of his reign, he is no longer the vigorous monarch who once rode with black-clad Oprichniki through burning towns. His body is deteriorating, eaten away by chronic illness and years of stress, but his appetite for cruelty refuses to dim. If anything, age strips away the last filters that once disguised his obsessions. What remains is a man who sees treachery in every shadow, sin in every gesture, and death not as an enemy, but as a constant companion whispering in his ear. The Russia of the late 1570s and 1580s bears the scars of his paranoia. Famines rage, partly because of his policies and partly because of war. Peasants starve in fields while the Tsar funnels resources into endless campaigns against Poland and the Livonian Order. His armies march, bleed, and retreat, leaving little but exhaustion. Ivan convinces himself these struggles are divine trials, punishments meant to purify his people, or more specifically, to remind them that he alone carries the cross of leadership. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens are trapped between hunger and terror, praying for relief that never comes. One mainstream fact sums up this era. Ivan's later wars, especially the drawn-out Livonian campaign, drain Russia's resources and undermine his authority. Instead of victories, his subjects see prolonged stalemate and failure. That military weakness breeds more paranoia at home. Every defeat needs an explanation, and for Ivan, explanations always point to traitors. Generals, nobles, merchants, even distant relatives become scapegoats for setbacks. The cycle of torture and execution churns on, fueled now less by theater or strategy, and more by Ivan's desperate need to blame someone for Russia's crumbling fortunes. But there are quirks too, small absurdities that reveal how warped the man has become. Chroniclers note his obsession with astrology, constantly consulting the stars for omens. Imagine a ruler who one day executes a noble for supposed treason, then the next refuses to leave his chambers because the planets are in poor alignment. Some even claim Ivan kept lists of unlucky days when no business could be conducted, a bizarre luxury for a ruler whose empire teetered on collapse. At the same time, he develops a fixation with marriage. His first wife, Anastasia, had been a rare stabilizing influence, and her death decades earlier marked the beginning of his spirals. By the end of his life, he has married at least 7 times, perhaps more depending on how you count short-lived unions annulled or abandoned. Each new marriage, he insists, will give him stability or perhaps another heir, yet each ends in disappointment, rumor, or tragedy. Wives are sent to convents, exiled, or die under mysterious circumstances. The palace becomes a carousel of bridal processions that rarely last long enough for the ink on the wedding vows to dry. This fixation with succession becomes more pressing after he kills his heir, Ivan Ivanovich. That single blow, struck in a fit of rage, is the event historians still argue about most. Did Ivan truly mean to kill his son, or was it an accident of temper? The sources disagree, but the aftermath is clear. He weeps over the body, distraught, perhaps genuinely broken. For once, the man who orchestrated death as performance faces the reality of death as loss. The image of him cradling the lifeless heir has haunted Russian art and memory ever since, and with that act, he dooms his dynasty. The only surviving heir, Fyodor, is weak and unfit to rule. Ivan has destroyed his own future with the same hands that destroyed his enemies. The irony is almost crueler than any torture chamber. The man who demanded total control, who built an empire on fear, ensures that after his death, Russia will plunge into chaos. Historians call it the time of troubles, a period of famine, foreign invasion, and civil war. Ivan's legacy isn't just bloodshed in his own lifetime, it's decades of turmoil inflicted on the generations unlucky enough to inherit his wreckage. Still, even in decline, Ivan maintains his rituals of horror. In his last years, he retreats deeper into religion, dictating long confessions, making elaborate donations to monasteries, and drafting plans for his own sainthood. The hypocrisy is astonishing. The same man who burned towns and slaughtered innocents imagines himself venerated as a holy monk after death. Quirky tidbit, he even prepares monastic robes for himself, rehearsing how he will take vows when the moment comes. It's as if he believes God will forget centuries of terror because he tried on a cassock in his twilight years. And yet, scholars still debate whether he was fully delusional or cleverly manipulating faith to rewrite his reputation. Did he genuinely fear damnation and hope to cleanse himself, or was it just another performance? One final play staged for posterity? The uncertainty remains because Ivan, until the end, is both victim and director of his own legend. The final scene of his life is almost anticlimactic, though no less eerie. In 1584, Ivan collapses while playing a game of chess. Some accounts suggest poison, others natural illness, but all agree the moment is sudden. One minute he contemplates a move across the board, the next he slumps lifeless, leaving a court paralyzed in shock. After decades of fire and blood, the Tsar dies not on the battlefield or at the stake of an enemy, but seated at a game of strategy, still trying to control the pieces until the last breath. Russia doesn't mourn him in the way empires mourn visionaries. Relief mixes with fear. The legacy he leaves is contradictory. He expanded the territory of Russia dramatically, centralizing power in ways that shaped the state for centuries. But he also hollowed out its nobility, drained its economy, and terrorized its people. He left a throne to a weak heir and a society traumatized by violence. The terrible in his name, given centuries later, captures both sides. Terrible as in awe-inspiring power, terrible as in horrifying cruelty. The chilling part? His methods never fully disappear. Later Russian rulers study his reign as both warning and model. Some adopt his tactics of fear. Others try to distance themselves but find the allure of absolute control hard to resist. Ivan lingers in the Russian psyche, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a ghost, whispering to rulers that cruelty, if wielded with ceremony, can hold a nation together, at least for a while. The audience in this story, though, isn't just his subjects. It's us, centuries later, listening with a mix of horror and fascination, because Ivan embodies a truth about power. Give one man unchecked authority, and the line between governance and sadism blurs fast. His tortures may feel medieval, his paranoia archaic, but the psychology, the hunger for control, the fear of betrayal, the obsession with legacy, those feel uncomfortably timeless. And so the tale drifts toward its end, with the Tsar lying in his coffin, dressed in monastic robes, as though the mask of piety could hide the scars he left on millions. But death doesn't erase memory. The Russia he leaves will stumble through famine and civil war, all because one boy, raised among betrayals and poison feasts, grew into a man who thought cruelty was the only language worth speaking. Still, the story can't simply stop on a corpse. To linger too long on his final breath would be to give him the dignity of a quiet ending, and he deserves no such neatness. His reign echoes on in the burned villages, the ruined monasteries, the chronicles filled with whispered tales of men in black with dog heads on their saddles. His ghost doesn't fade. It crouches in every dark corner of Russian history, reminding later rulers that the path of terror is always waiting, ready to be walked again. And yet, for those listening tonight, the lesson isn't just about Russia. It's about the human weakness for spectacle, for control, for the temptation to let fear govern. Ivan built a world where people clapped at executions because they had no choice. The danger is always there. That fear becomes normal, cruelty becomes policy, and history remembers not the people who suffered, but the rulers who inflicted suffering. The Tsar is gone, his bones dust, but the stage he built, the stage of torture, fear, and fire, remains in memory. And the question lingers unanswered, a cliffhanger across centuries. When power whispers its promises, will humanity ever learn to resist the theater of cruelty? And now, as the echoes of Ivan's reign fade away, we step gently off the stage of torture and terror and into something softer. The flames that roared through Moscow, the cries that carried across frozen rivers, the endless parades of fear, all of it begins to dissolve like smoke thinning into air. What remains isn't the horror, but the quiet reminder that history is just memory now, powerless to touch you in this moment. Picture the Kremlin as it stands centuries later, no longer the dark labyrinth haunted by a czar's paranoia, but a collection of courtyards and chambers where tourists shuffle with cameras, children tug at their parents' sleeves, and voices echo not with commands, but with chatter. The very stones that once carried the weight of dread now carry footsteps of curiosity. That's what time does. It takes what once terrified and renders it into story. Let your shoulders sink a little as you remember this. The weight of Ivan's punishments, his endless suspicion, his obsession with fire and faith, all of that belongs to another age. It doesn't belong in your room tonight. What belongs here is stillness, the soft hum of your surroundings, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. Every inhale pulls you further from the cruelty you've just heard. Every exhale lays another stone between you and the centuries of fear. Slowly, steadily, you are moving from the firelit squares of Moscow back into the quiet of your own space. Close your eyes and imagine the river at Novgorod, frozen solid now in memory. No soldiers, no torches, no chains, just ice stretching calmly, silently across the water. The city itself is rebuilt, reshaped, reimagined by generations who outlived the Tsar's terror. The world carried on, his reign ended, and life continued. That's the lesson history always whispers. The cruelty of one lifetime cannot outlast the endurance of humanity. Even with all his proclamations of divine authority, became dust in a coffin. The black-cloaked Oprichnina who once rode out like harbingers of doom are long gone, their symbols lost to centuries of forgetting. What endures isn't the fear they sowed, but the stories people tell, retold until they lose their sharp edges. Tonight, you've heard one of those stories. Tomorrow, it will sit quietly in your memory, just one more shadow among countless others the past has left us. Now notice how calm the silence around you feels. The story of Ivan the Terrible may have carried sharpness, but the silence you hold now has no such edge. It is soft, round, and weightless. It carries you downward like a gentle tide pulling you further into rest. Let your body grow heavier. Feel the way your limbs sink as if the mattress itself is drawing you closer. Each breath is slower now, each pause between longer. The tension that held you while listening begins to uncoil until all that's left is ease. Remember this, history is full of storms, but you are not in them. You are watching them from the safety of distance, a witness only. The thunder has passed, only the faint echo remains, and even that is dissolving now. As your thoughts drift, let them fade the way Ivan's power faded. One by one, let each thought step off the stage until the curtain falls and only quiet remains. In that quiet, there is no Tsar, no fear, no fire, just you, resting in safety. The night belongs to you now. Let it wrap you in softness. Let it carry you into sleep. And when tomorrow comes, a new corner of history will wait, ready to whisper its own strange lessons.